And we're live. We're live on this wonderful Saturday. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the LYF Matters Podcast. I'm your host, Keon Monroe. And as you know, this is a platform that focuses on understanding the mind and the power of thought and how to cultivate healthy relationships with yourself, loving yourself first. That's what life stands for, right? So that the others can benefit from the love that you have from yourself. And I have this amazing guest, and I just started following him, and he stuck out like a sore thumb, but a good sore thumb, like the sour candy that you can't help but to like keep diving into you. And it's like good and salty, sweet and sour and good, all this good stuff. So I reached out to him and asked him if he would come be a guest on the show because I think that you guys would completely benefit off of all of the knowledge, vulnerability, and openness that he has. And I will give you all the information so that you can follow him at the end of the show. But welcome. I told him I was going to pronounce his name absolutely wonderful. It is Jean Semelfort,
You
right?
got it on point. Yeah.
I got it on point. Yay! Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I think it's a privilege to be able to be on a platform like this and have these conversations. As stated, my name is Jean Semelfort. I am a licensed professional counselor, licensed mental health therapist. In the state of New Jersey. I operate out of my practice called the Cactus Center. Cactus is a acronym that stands for Cultivating Acceptance and Congruence through Uncovering Strength. I know that's a mouthful, but I definitely put a lot of thought into all into all of that. I do clinical work, so I meet with individuals, couples, families. I also do some consultation work that's specific to interpersonal violence, sexual violence, men and masculinities. So engaging with men specifically around a conversation about what it means to be a manhood and how the things we've learned intersect with some of those very problematic areas of our lives, and how do we start to reframe it, challenge it, push back in a way that reconnects us with our full human self. So that in itself is a lot, but we could definitely dive into a few things around that. But I am honored to be here and to be able to have this conversation. So thank you for having me.
You're absolutely welcome. I'm happy that you're here, and I love that you work with men in particular because for the month of June, I've really been focusing on men because it's Men's Health Month, right? And I don't want to just talk about physical health, even though that's very important. I always get on men about going to the doctor, especially men of color who tend to not
Yeah.
want to go to the doctor until the last minute, but also the mental and emotional health of
Mm,
men, because I think that it's something a lot of times people tend to kind of pass over when it comes to men, and
absolutely.
hold they don't hold it with the same, grace and the same level of importance as they do other people. And I think
Mm,
with men being some of, our greatest leaders in the world, that their mental and emotional health is actually imperative. If I dare say, even more imperative, because being head of household a lot of times and being up in these positions of power, to not have the stability of mental and emotional wellness, right, affects everybody that you're involved with and everyone that, you are reaching out to and has some form of access to you.
yeah.
What do you think about that when it comes to, how we think about men's mental and emotional health and wellness?
I mean, I think you hit it on a nose, right? And I think it's two parts of it. So when we talk about just racial identity, folks of color, black men in particular, and we think about blackness, for instance, right? That we've learned and tried to understand that even blackness in itself is almost a rejection of mental health, right? This idea of needing to lean on someone or to be supported by someone outside of that structure, outside of whatever your family structure is, right?
Hmm.
Trusting in a stranger that we don't know and saying, hey, I'm going to come to you with these very deep, dark secrets that exist And I've been living through all my life, and have been taught just through my blackness that you have to protect these things, because if people know them and they have access to these secrets, right, that they'll do some hurtful or damaging things. And then
Mhm.
you layer it on with, right, just gender, like as a man, right, what it means to be a man. Like mental health is contrary to what we understand manhood to be, right? Manhood is you take it on the chin, you endure it, you don't complain, you don't get sensitive, you don't get emotional about it. And so now mental health is asking that I do these things, even though I feel them and I've spent years repressing them, learning how to just kind of cope with them without actually acknowledging them.
Mhm.
Mental health is saying, hey, I want you to actually confront these things now. And so it's very weird and odd for many of us to be able to do that, to some respects. But I also think it's a piece where we've learned as a community how to ignore, right, the needs or the emotional needs of men, because men have also learned how to ignore it and not necessarily bring it to the forefront. So I think you hit it on the nose the way in which you described it, because all of that is a part of that concoction of resistance or barrier to dealing with some of these things.
I agree. I always say that when it comes to men, um, and their mental and emotional health, right? Creating a space where they feel safe enough to discuss their mental health, feel safe enough to talk about how they feel. It's this whole thing going on right now that says it's okay to not be okay, right?
Mm,
And usually we stick a pin in that, right?
yeah,
I like to say it's okay to not be okay. So let's talk about the steps that we need to take and how long do I need to sit with you, right? Until
mm,
you become okay. Because I'm
yeah,
not trying to rush your process to hurry up and be okay for my benefit, right?
yeah,
I want you to know that it's in your ability to say I'm not okay. I'm not doing so good, right? I want to be able to get you to talk about, the why. Why aren't you okay? What is it
yeah.
about, what is it about what you're going through that makes you come to this place of not being
Mm,
okay? What do you think some of the challenges are when it comes to being able to be vulnerable and what men need to feel safe, especially in their relationships, right? Let's not even get into the work and workplace because that's
yeah,
that everybody expects men to be okay when it comes to being at work and being outside.
hmm,
But you know, sometimes even when you can muster up the strength to be strong out in the world, right? When you're home, when you're in your relationship, what is it? What do you think it takes?
yeah. I mean, I think people struggle to hear men's emotions when we express them,
Hmm.
because I think one part of it, yeah, one part of it is that sometimes the way men express not being okay is not in the traditional ways in which we understand it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, some psychologists and some psychotherapists talk about these covert ways in which emotions or distress show up for men. So, men in some ways tend to respond more with anger,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so when we respond with anger, naturally so, other people receive that anger and respond in kind or respond in resistance or distance from that. But anger oftentimes is definitely one of those emotions that says, hey, there are some other things happening for you underneath all of that, right? We see anger as a secondary emotion. So that's one piece. The other piece is that sometimes it's like self-injurious behaviors that we normalize to be as just regular things. So you might find men who engage in significant substance use or abuse, right? Alcohol, marijuana, cigarettes, smoking, vaping, things that sort. You might find that in men that engage in self-injurious or high risk promiscuous or sexual activity,
Yeah.
right? Or I don't want to say sort of promiscuity, but more so just high risk sexual activity in a sense where they are not cognizant or conscious of right taking proper or healthy or formulating healthy connections or healthy sexual relationships, or very much so distancing and detaching themselves from the access of pleasure, right? Um, but I think sometimes we don't look at those things and say, huh, like something's going on with you. And then there are times where men try to use their emotional vocabulary. They try to use their words to articulate frustration, annoyance, disappointment, sadness, disgust, whatever it may be. And I think as a community, we're so not used to men articulating those feelings that we respond with our own discomfort, right? Like we respond with our own discomfort, our own defensiveness, and unintentionally we shut down, right, that opportunity of expression, right? So once I express myself and you tell me, yo, like, what do you express? Like, what are you saying right now? Like, what you're feeling doesn't matter. You shouldn't be feeling this way. Why are you feeling that way? You're not over it. You still on this, right? Like those types of responses then communicate to men that, hey, like whatever you feel, we actually don't care about it. Even though we may care about it, but our ability to respond to it, we struggle with because within the construct, right, just as much as men learn not to express those emotions, the community learns not to expect emotional expressions from men.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Going back to you saying sometimes men express, anger. And I always say, as someone who sort of had an emotional intelligence and understanding the emotion, I like, for example, when my son, who's 19, he'll be 20 tomorrow, and he'll say, I'm upset, I'm angry about something. And I'll say, okay, well, because we know anger is um, an expression of unjust or unfair. what
Hmm.
what do you feel is unjust or
Hmm.
unfair, right? Because I always like to, I use the feelings wheel all the time with my clients, and I'll just,
Nice.
let's break down, let's like really understand exactly what it is you're feeling so that we can address it head on. Are you angry with something unfair or unjust, or are you sad? Do you feel like there's grief and loss, and you're hurt, so you're sad,
Yeah.
you're not necessarily angry. And and when they are angry, is it due to shame? Are you upset because there's embarrassment? Is there
Hmm.
shame which causes anger, right? Because now you don't know how to deal with the shame, so you're upset.
Yeah.
You're mad, right? And then to your point of finding different things to get involved with, drugs and smoking and alcohol, and you know, I always call it sex all over the place.
I mean, yeah.
Sex all over the place. It's just like, you know, trying to using that as a coping mechanism of not dealing with self and not handling self, and maybe not knowing how to handle self. And I always say you're not going to find all of your answers in the sheets of multiple women. You know,
Yeah.
it's important to understand the stillness that's required, right? To look in the mirror and say, what do I need to do? Do I need a therapist? Do I not have the words? Can I not articulate? Do I not have the language to express what it is necessarily that I'm feeling? Do I know what I'm feeling? Am I aware
Yeah.
of what I'm feeling? Right? Do I understand the why so that I can talk about the why not? Right?
Hmm.
Um, and I agree that sometimes the world that we live in, and especially in our community, especially as people of color, it's not always okay to talk about how you're feeling. As a man, I have plenty of men who I work with who always say, I just, I've never grew up talking about my feelings, or I'm not allowed to cry,
Yeah.
or, I can say what I feel, but it's shut down. I don't feel heard. I don't feel value. I don't feel understood. You know, I'm almost crucified for my tears, as though I should only have them when physical pain is involved, right? Not necessarily
Not
when,
even then sometimes, but yeah.
right, right. And so I think that it's important that we as a community, and then I really get on, women, because me as a woman can be able to speak on that, is it's really important to create a safe space, and extend primary love to men.
Yeah.
And primary love, I did a life tip, on it, and I talk about it all the time. It is compassionate communication. It's creating a safe space for someone to be authentically themselves, right?
Mm.
And feel vulnerable enough to be transparent and honest and forthcoming with you about what they feel, who they are, the hidden stories, the secrets, the bones or the skeletons in the closets, the makeup of who they are, without fear of
Yeah.
judgment, of condemnation, right? Or that it will be, used as a tool, turned into a weapon against them at a later point in their life.
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Oh, it makes a ton of sense. One piece I would add on to that, right, is that I think, for us as men, one of the things we've learned, um, as a part of like emotional expression sometimes is a form of manipulation, right? And so
Hmm.
I think sometimes um, when women, right, struggle in some instances to sort of receive the emotional experience. Sometimes there's also that detection of manipulation or coercion that's happening from the emotional expression. So I think the balance, right, is how do we, one, teach partners, and when I think of partners, I'm thinking of like opposite sex women or same sex dynamics, but just how do we teach partners that are in relationship with men how to hear the emotion, but also how do we teach men to utilize or express that emotion from a place of vulnerability, transparency, but not with the expectation that something is going to drastically change in that moment. And that
Yeah.
emotional expression is more about a progressional thing, right? That I need to leave space to know that when I'm vulnerable or transparent, that may create an emotional reaction for that other person,
Hmm.
right? And if we've done the work, right, that couples work or that individual work,
Hmm.
right, that I should know that when I express it, I'm trusting in my partner's ability to receive it. And at the same time, I'm going to know that my partner is also going to have their own emotional experience based on the things that I'm sharing in that moment. So how do we create a safe dynamic for this dialogue, that's not riddled with an expectation that I'm going to convince you, right, to be or act like to do something different. Now, there are moments where there's kind of this one-sided, if we were to call it that, right, this one-sided thing where a harm was afflicted on me as a man, and I should be able to have the space to express it, and then accountability happens on that other end, right? But I think accountability systemically is something that we struggle with, right? America struggles with accountability, right? You know, I
Yes.
think as a whole, right, in so many facets and so many areas of our life, we struggle with accountability. But I think when you have a dynamic where women are connected with emotions, men aren't, and then women internalize that as well, that when a man's feelings is hurt, it almost doesn't trigger this sense of, oh man, I should be accountable in this moment, right?
Hmm.
It's almost like a shock. It's like, what the hell? Like, you
Hmm.
hurt?
Hmm.
I,
Hmm.
so you start to question it versus to actually feel it and empathize with it. So I just wanted to add that piece because I do think there is a layer sometimes that exists that we don't necessarily talk about transparently.
That's interesting. I'm going to ask you to expand on that just a little bit and give me an example of the emotional manipulation that you're talking about that men kind of do from time to time. What's an example?
Absolutely. So one thing that stands out for me is that, so for instance, we may express disappointment as a coercion for that person to change the behavior, right? So I'm trying to think, like, if we're thinking about like sex, we'll take sex for instance. And sometimes in relationships, um, when a man may sort of be disappointed by his partner's lack of desire, right, or frequency or whatever it may be,
Mhm.
then he may shut down, right? And it may be an intentional shutdown. I'm going to distance myself. I may say things like, oh, you know how many women might be lucky to blah, blah, blah to be with me, right? Or, you know how many people would such and such, right? So I'm expressing that disappointment, but the way in which I'm expressing it in some ways is to elicit shame and guilt for that person so that
Mhm.
they then turn around and now give me what it is that I want. And so it's a form of manipulation where I may be feeling genuine disappointment or even rejection in that moment. But
Mhm.
instead, what I do is I translate it and turn it into a shaming moment, a guilting moment to that other person. And that
Mhm.
becomes a form of manipulation because we know that for our partners and particularly women, that if they're connected to their emotions more so, that you make a woman feel guilty, right? It's going to sit with her, right?
Yeah.
It's going to sit with her for a bit. And then she may then start sort of pushing or over or, bypassing what's going on for her that maybe acts or creates some resistance to engage with her partner in a certain way. She may
Mhm.
not do that exploration, but more so feel forced to kind of just abide by something because of that shame and guilt that we just engaged in. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
I can't even like in all honesty, I've done it. I've had someone do it to me. I've had someone do it to me. And I
Yeah.
suppressed what it is that I was feeling, right? I felt like he didn't put me in a position to express why I don't have the desire. He didn't create a safe space for me to have open, honest, transparent dialogue. So I suppressed my feelings. And then for me, and I'm not this way anymore. At least and when I do it, I catch myself is to people please, right? So to suppress what it is that I'm feeling and to try to show up more to please the person that I'm with because I don't want him to be disappointed and think I'm rejecting him by not having, that level of desire instead of talking to him about why my desire is not the way it is. And it doesn't have anything to do with him personally per se, but more so my own,
Yeah.
things that I might be dealing with on the end. But with my understanding that he may not hear what I have to say, he may not understand what I have to say, he may not value what I have to say, and there's no safe space that he has created for me to believe that if I do tell him all of this information, right, that he will listen with the intent to understand, listen
Yeah.
with the intent to hear me, right? And I just, yeah, kind of shut down and people please. And so yeah, that scenario and that level of manipulation, yep, I've seen it, I've
Yeah.
experienced it, so I get it. And I always say sometimes, I think you said we need to be able to have conversations where we express ourselves and understand that our partner, might be listening and experiencing their own feelings when we share how it is that we feel. I always like to say it's important to understand your emotional filters.
Yeah.
Un- Understand that, and when having these emotional filters consistently apply compassionate communication, right?
Mm.
The ebb and flow of hearing and receiving and understanding and how to communicate in a way that it kind of cultivates intimacy in that dialogue, right? And
Yeah.
the a little bit of the breakdown is, I can tell you something, right? That's an example. I can share something with you and you'll hear me, but you are listening with emotional filters, right? You're
Hmm.
taking a past experience of what you've experienced in the past. And instead of allowing me the grace to show up in this relationship right now, in this experience, and talk to you about how I feel right now with you
Yeah.
and who you are right now, you're making me suffer. You're making me suffer for someone else's, mishap or mistake that they did. And now you're processing what I'm saying through an emotional filter of a past experience, and your response to me might be reactive, right? But it's
Yeah.
giving me the opportunity to express without, I always say, help me, allow me to express myself without her, and her.
Mm.
Do you get it?
Yeah.
Allow me to
Yeah.
express myself without her, and her. Hear me for what I'm saying to you and how I'm feeling right now. And the best way to do that, when I say it with tone. Tone is a
Yeah.
really big part of compassionate communication, and also the feedback. No, I always say, does that make sense? You say that too. Just
Yeah. Yeah.
right. So that lets you know that we're really good at communicating, because when I say, do you understand what I'm saying? Does that make sense? What do you think I'm expressing when I say this to you? Right? I am married to the desire of you understanding, what I'm saying to you, because the outcome and the intimacy that we have is so important, right? I don't want you to mishear me through emotional filters. And I want to confirm that you're hearing what I say, not hearing what her, she, and her have
Yeah.
said. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
I mean that's beautifully said. I think that's that in itself was so validating, right? Because I think when we're talking about men in particular, right, that I think sometimes we see men as unemotional beings. And of
Mhm.
course it comes along with the persona, but men are particularly sensitive. And so I think when you walk into a relationship and you talk to men, especially when it comes to dating or just, and I won't even just keep it at dating. I'll say in maybe sort of parental relationships with boys and with older men, right? This sense of feeling like when they enter a space and they make a mistake or they do something, that for that individual on the receiving end, what's now triggered is all these other experiences that
Mhm.
maybe have nothing to do with the experience before them. So
Mhm.
then they, right, men at times become on the receiving end of that traumatic response, right? That triggered traumatic response that's coming from that person, right? Because that person, like you said, is bringing so many other people in the room that's not in a room, right? It's just the two of us maybe in that dynamic, but these other people aren't in the room. And so I think in those moments, and when we talk about barriers, right, that becomes that feeling. It's like, hold up, I got to respond for past exes, right? Or your dad's mistake, or your mom, right? I have to respond for all of these people in a moment that doesn't feel that heavy for me, right? It hurts, but it's not all of that. And so when all of that comes into a moment, it does something. It almost hijacks the situation, right? It
Mhm.
hijacks the emotional experience for that person because now the person can't sit with their emotions that they brought into the dynamic or the conversation in some ways. And I would say that like I've done it in relationships where you almost feel obligated now to console, right, your partner, right, or to sort of bring it down
Mhm.
so that you can leave the room or the space for your partner's emotional experience or your mother's emotional experience or your sisters or your sibling or whoever else emotional experience is more so dominating that space because it's too much, right?
Yeah.
It's too much. So you almost feel inclined to take a back seat and you receive a reminder in that moment that what you feel isn't necessarily as important as what's happening for the other person.
Darn. Yeah. And even on the flip side of consoling, it's defending. Now you have put me
Yeah,
in a position where I have to defend how I feel because you are unwilling to accept my truth in this
yeah,
moment at this time. And the to me, the only way that we can create emotional development, the starting point has to be understanding. It has to be truth. It has to be a level of, awareness of how I feel, acceptance of how I feel. You
Hmm.
know, the guy I'm with, I say, I'm not going to always understand right away, but I am
Yeah.
determined. I'm determined to trying. So if I tell you I don't understand, right? Don't get frustrated and feel like you have to defend. Don't get frustrated and feel like you have to come at me. I always say, can you try it another way? Can you tell it to me another way? I'm trying
Yeah.
to I'm trying to understand. I can't necessarily relate to that, or I can say, you know what? That's not something I would normally think to feel, or that's not my go-to feeling about that. But if that's how you feel, right now, let's deal with that. And a
Yeah.
huge part of um, and I think this is men with their friendships, men with
Mm.
their relationships with women. I do this even with my son. I always say it's really important to understand the intent, right?
Mm.
And know what the intention is. Do you have ill intent? And I use this type of metaphor. I always say the bomb in your backpack, right? And so, for example, if I love you, right, and I am aware that you have a bomb in your backpack and it could hurt or kill you or you're going to
Hmm.
explode, I can say, "Oh my God, you have a bomb in your back. Take it off." First of all, you might
Yeah.
listen to me and be like, I've heard this story before. She's just trying to prank me, or she can't say that's the emotional filter part of it, right?
Yeah.
My ability to communicate that with you is this is the only way I know how, right?
Yeah.
And we get that. And someone will say, um, I don't like how you just I don't like how you said it to me, or whatever the
Hmm.
case may be. If I really love you and I care, right, I will slow down and I will try again. I will give grace for where we are, the situation, and I will say, it is not my intent to hurt or harm you. It is my intent for you to take this off your back. And I will continue to try until you take it off because I don't
Yeah.
want you hurt or harmed. And I'm trying to get something to grow here.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I mean, it does, right? Because I think that that communication piece, right, is that what happens for folks when there is this like crisis like experience, right? When I have this crisis and I have to communicate this crisis, right, that I'm observing, I'm aware of, I see, and then
Mm-hmm.
what happens for that person on the receiving end, right? So it's a lot, right? So I think there may be moments where my partner will communicate something in a crisis like that manner, right? Where it is like, oh my God, you have a bomb in your backpack. But I think there was a piece you said where you talked about just rooting yourself in that love and that understanding, right? That if I know that this person loves me, right, and I understand that, um, then how do I filter the communication through that love, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not necessarily feel like I have to respond in kind, or if I am going to respond in kind, respond in a way that sort of complements the crisis that's in front of us, right? And
Mm-hmm.
says, okay, how do we eradicate or get through this? But I think that's the part, right? Is that sometimes a lot of us are so much in crisis, right? Men are in crisis, right? And I think we're increasingly, our awareness around it is increasing.
Mm-hmm.
It's still, of course, there's always room for that improvement, but we are in crisis. What we've learned as men, what we've digested, what we've internalized, puts us and keeps us in a state of crisis. And so I think when we constantly filter everything in that, it almost makes it hard to even compute and understand that when someone's telling us about ourselves in that moment, right, that they're doing it from a place of love. But in our state of crisis, whoever is around us is also amped up, right? They're hyper vigilant. They're just anxious. Right? Oh, like I don't want to say this shit. Sorry, I don't want to say this, right? Because so, I don't want to say this because if I say this, right, it's going to set off that bomb. And so I'm more avoidant and less likely to communicate anything because I have an observation or awareness that this man is so much in crisis that if I critique, comment, or even say, hey, you have a bomb in your backpack right now, it's
Mhm.
going to go off soon. I almost freeze and not say anything. And pretty much the explosion just takes us both out. Right. So I
Mm.
think kind of just that communication piece and how do we really round ourselves and root ourselves in that love. But I think, as you stated even earlier on, it's the intimacy. It's even men being able to connect with themselves in a very intimate fashion, an intimate, full, holistic way that just acknowledges every aspect and category of who they are. But
Oh,
I like that analogy a lot.
the bomb in the back. Yeah,
Yeah.
so many different ways. I use this with. I had a couple that came to work with me, and they were just like, we don't know how to communicate, we don't know how to talk to each other, and I was just like, all right, let's start, with the foundation of your love, right? Do you have intent to hurt or harm him? Do you have intent to hurt or harm her, right? And they both said no. I said, okay. So whenever something big happens, the crisis, the bomb in the back, the backpack, something, right? Now you guys have to figure out the language and the kindness, right, and the compassion,
Mm,
and not necessarily um, hold on to. You can have emotional filters in your marriage or in your relationship of past things that you say you forgave, but it's still here, right? In your
yeah.
and you're listening in a way where you forget that the intent. Let me remember that she has no intent to hurt or harm me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that processing of the mindset, I always challenge the neural linguistics of it, and like challenge your thought process, right? This is the situation, right? Express how you feel about the situation so that because your feelings will dictate your actions, which will dictate your outcomes, right?
Yeah.
So if this person has no ill intent, though you feel this way, right, there's no need to respond in defense necessarily. It's finding the language, you know. Um, I know you don't have, like I said, the intent to hurt or harm me. What is it that you're trying to say? What is it that you're trying to do? You hurt me. This was hurtful. I feel this. And I know you
Yeah.
have no intention to make me feel this way. And I tell women all the time when it comes to talking to men, you need to say, I love you. If you start with
Mm,
love, you know what I mean? Then the intimacy,
yeah.
although the intimacy will remain. You start with love because this is someone that you love, right? This is a man that you love, right? With the compassion and the understanding that who he is in the world that we live in, it's already a lot. So let me be kind in my communication because I
Mm,
know I have no intent to hurt or harm. So let me be
yeah.
kind with my delivery and tell you I love you, but this is something that you've done that hurts and harms me, and I know that you're not doing that intentionally. So let's talk about, did I do something to cause you to react that way? Because we need to
Mm,
work on that, because I don't ever want you to treat me this way. I don't want to provoke in any way, shape, or form for you to be that way. And if your intent is not to harm me, where is this coming from? What are you processing what I said to make you respond or treat me or act this way? That is that dialogue. And they weren't having that type of communication because they never started with love. And they forgot
yeah.
that their intent was to love each other, not to hurt or harm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make
Uh,
sense?
I mean, yeah, I think so when you said that like the first thought that came up to my mind was that like men need softness, right? Like we still need softness, and that softness doesn't, like, having softness doesn't remove the necessity of accountability, right? It's just recognizing that an emotionally charged and feeling in vulnerable areas, right? That softness, that gentleness is a level of care that allows people to show up differently. So I used to work in a facility with folks who were incarcerated. So it was an all male facility
Mhm.
filled up with men who were incarcerated. And I was maybe one of the few male mental health clinicians in that space, as you find in many other spaces. But
Yeah.
um, and one of the critiques, interestingly enough, that I received was like, "Oh, Gene, you're too soft with them." Right. And so it was this idea that when you work with men or you engage men, that the only way men can hear you or listen to you is if you're rough, right? If you're unkind, if you're rigid, if you're rugged in any type of way, right? Because those are sort of attributes and characteristics we attribute or connect to masculinity or manhood, right? Rough, rigid, logical, right? Unemotional. And so I think like what I found effective with me, especially as another male engaging with other men, is like this modeling of softness and kindness,
Mm.
right? This idea of, look, I'm going to respect you. I'm going to engage with you from a place of love, a
Yeah.
place of concern, and a place of warmth, right? And I think when you said that, it's like, wow, yeah, like kindness. Tarana Burke says unkindness is a serial killer, right? This idea that consistently being unkind is really what's killing a lot of us. And
Yeah.
I would say that men, in many ways, are recipients of unkindness in so many ways, and
Yeah.
especially in very vulnerable moments. So I think the idea of that softness, that kindness, that love, and centering from that place, I think that's beautiful and amazing. So, yeah, I that really stuck out to me. So I appreciate you bringing that into this space.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a mom. I work with boys all the time too, from 100 Black Men to the Urban League and
Mm,
females. And I've gone to Morehouse several times, especially as me being a Spelmanite. I'm always
oh, nice.
when we do events and stuff like that with Morehouse boys who are getting ready to go off to college. Um, I always let them know that, handle yourself with care in this process. And it's okay to be gentle. It's
Mm,
okay to, in this life of, ruggedness and sharp edges and fierce and hard conversations and unkindness, right? Try to create a space for you with ease as you are evolving and growing in this thing called life. And my recommendation to girls and women um, is allow the men in your life to feel comfortable and safe enough to make a mistake with you, right?
mm,
Because a mistake is proof of effort, right?
mm,
And it's also the opportunity to learn and grow and try a different way. And in our human experiences, we're always making a mistake. I tell my son all the time, if you can't make a mistake, sweet baby, what can you make? If
yeah.
you can't make a mistake, what can you make? How do you learn? How do you grow? Where are your receipts? You know,
Mm,
and and the the learning and the growth and the mistakes may not be, the same as mine, but I'm not asking you to be like me. I'm letting you know that it's okay, to be easy on yourself as you are in a space with me, and the ebb and flow of learning and growing and evolving together in safety. I encourage men as much as possible
yeah.
to ex- to sit with yourself and know you and learn you. I recently did a life tip video for men, a dear men, and
Hmm.
it was, you are deserving of your own love. You have a right to your own love. We
Yeah.
desire a loving version of you. I encourage emotional intelligence. I encourage emotionally healthy relationships. I encourage transparency and vulnerability, and encourage women to create safe spaces, honest, right?
Yeah.
Everything doesn't have to be out of anger, everything doesn't have to be of disappointment. Um, and it's not to say that you won't ever be disappointed in men. It's the language used when expressing that disappointment.
Yeah.
And we're living in a world where especially men of color are constantly being stereotyped, right?
Hmm.
And being attacked, and they either have a target on their back or a dollar sign on their face,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And where is the in between? Somebody that wants to make money off of your talent and your gift, right? Or they don't like you and they are looking to take you out. And we have to create a space in the middle of that, right? With the acknowledgement of the world that they live in. And
Yeah.
and and that middle ground of, you know, this is a space of ease. This is a space to fall apart. You don't have to have all the answers. You can make the mistakes here. I'm
Yeah.
married to understanding you and learning you. I want to give you, I will hold you in a space and offer you a mirror so that you can see yourself to help you understand yourself. Um, how often do you find it where men feel like they have that, and how likely is it for them to attempt to gain that in
Yeah. Yeah.
relationships?
I think what's interesting is that I think oftentimes um, we may have those spaces,
Mhm.
um, but sometimes we abuse those spaces,
Hmm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, and I think sometimes some spaces reinforce the abuse of that, right? Of that very genuine safe space
Hmm.
around it. So I'll give you an example. Here's what I mean by it, right? Is that if I make a mistake, and let's say this is my 10th mistake, right? Sort of the repetition of that same thing that we've talked about hundreds of times, right? And I do it, and you're at like your wits' end around it. You're just exhausted, you're tired, you're fatigued. And then now in your response, right? Your response isn't as kind, it isn't as compassionate as it started off, right? But then I transition, let's say I transition to my boys and I say, oh, my partner, she's acting different, right? Like she's not kind. And my boy's like, oh well, F her, this is that and the third. It doesn't matter. If she really loved you, she would understand that this is a mistake and this is a growing process, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
So then in that, right, sometimes we sort of jeopardize the space that we do have. And then at the same time, I will say that there are spaces in which we have access to where those folks don't even have the education specific on how to hold it and continue to make it a safe space without shaming me. So I think it's multifaceted, right? That
Mhm.
because I don't want to say that men don't have those spaces because I think in many ways we do,
Mhm.
and I think in many ways we don't know how to take it, how to sort of really capitalize. Actually, I don't want to utilize capitalize. I want to say benefit. How to really allow ourselves to benefit from having that type of space. And then I want to say also, right, that sometimes we have folks who try to hold that space for us, but really struggle on how to hold it in the most effective way, where it feels safe. Because I think one thing that I hear, and it's not my word, so I don't want to take it, but I don't know who originated this concept, but we talk about brave spaces, right? Brave spaces need to be safe, but it's also with an understanding that in a brave space, you're making a very intentional decision to operate in something that feels risky, right?
Mhm.
I'm going to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is a risk,
Yeah.
so I'm going to open up, I'm going to share, I'm going to say something, right? And I'm going to hope that it's safe, but I'm also going to recognize that there's some risk with that vulnerability. and that's what comes along with the growth. So as you said, right, like what are you creating? If you don't make mistakes, what are you creating? But if you don't make mistakes, then also allow yourself to be receptive to corrections, to feedback,
Mm,
to love along with those things, right? Then those mistakes are going to be patterns, and it's going to repeat itself. But I think men struggle to create those spaces for each other.
yeah.
That I will say is something that I see, is that we struggle to kind of create a space where we can be that vulnerable with each other, right? Because usually when we're in collective spaces, sometimes it's about sports, it's about
Mm-hmm.
women, it's
Mm-hmm.
about sexual prowess, it's about economic growth or money,
Yeah.
right? Or the image or the personification of money,
Yeah.
right? It's a lot of superficial things. And sometimes I would say for each other, we struggle in creating that type of safe space. So I know
Yeah.
I said a lot. I hope it all made sense,
That's,
but
no, it's good, and it makes sense. And I think it's really important that you express that sometimes men do, because a lot of men feel like, well, I don't have anybody to talk to. And I'd like to hear from you that you're saying, actually, yes, you do. You're just not utilizing it to your benefit the way you could be. And then two, um, your circle of friends or your group of people who you go to or have that access to talk about those things, right, are not pouring into you that will help you benefit from the safe space that you have. Um, so that's really important because sometimes, like I said, men feel like, well, I don't have it, or this is not allowed and this is not okay. And it's like, no, you need to kind of recognize what you have and what's in front of you,
yeah,
and then set clear boundaries with your friends if they are not supportive of the happiness that you are trying to cultivate in the relationship that you have, with the person that you're with.
yeah.
So that's super important. I got it. So as we close, because it went by like that. My
It
goodness,
did actually.
it really went by like that. As we close, um, for this month, in light of everything that's going on in the world, in light of you know the dynamics between men and women, in light of the post that I love so much where you talked about, Michael B. Jordan and Lori Harvey as he's
Yes.
mourning and saddened, as she's doing her own thing, and how that's being perceived in this world for men who are going through hurt, who men with men who are getting their heart broken, with men who can't seem to find a safe space in the world that we live in, and feel like they're constantly being attacked. And as someone who is a man in this world and works with men in this world, what advice would you give not only the men to from a
Hmm.
man to men, but what advice would you give as a man to women for men?
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to use one of the words that you stated earlier. You said commitment. So I think my advice to men, um, is to remain committed to your full self, right? And what I mean by that is this idea of just like staying connected with the fullness of your humanity. Recognize your masculine energy and your feminine energy, and don't let anyone sort of take that away from you, right? Don't let any relational failure take that away from you. Don't let your peers take that away from you. Don't let sort of the infrastructure of whatever community you're existing in to take that away from you, right? Because I think what tends to happen, in another post that I had, is I talked about the transition of the F, right? What makes a man become an F boy? And my belief is that sort of at the beginning or the origin of every F boy is sort of this very deep sense of heartbreak that happened earlier on, right? This idea that when I get my heart broken, now the best way to cope is to become emotionally detach and distance and start to view, right, the people, particularly women, as objects of my validation, right? And I think a part of that is a removal of your humanity that causes you to devalue someone else, right? So I want men to stay connected with their humanity, to stay connected with the value of humanity in themselves, even in the midst of fear, in the midst of failures, in the midst of hurt, in the midst of harm. And with that, right, to seek the supports needed to help them sustain that, right, to help them sustain that commitment, right? When we're committed as athletes or to fitness and things of that nature, right, we need that person to say, look, man, you don't need that donut right now, right? You don't need it right now. Because sometimes having that outside voice allows us to sort of just remind ourselves. And so we need those supports to say, hey, I see you moving away from your commitment to humanity, and I want to support you and kind of bring you back on that line. Now, I think for women, right, one of the things I ask is kind of on that sense of just saying, see the humanity in men, right? See the fullness in men. Even when we pretend, when we sort of personify these ideas of manhood and masculinity that we've internalized, we've digested, and we've hold on for, for dear life, that don't be fooled by that, right? Don't be fooled by it. Reject that notion and allow us to just know that the humanity is there, and know that softness and kindness and accountability and boundaries and all of those things can operate together, right? Be gentle, but gentleness doesn't mean it has to come at the expense of you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think it's okay for you could be gentle and you could be firm, right?
Mm-hmm.
Almost like a mattress setting, right? You make it firm when you need to, you make it softer when you need to, right? But I think like to know that you have that flexibility to be able to do that, and they can operate inclined and they're not mutually exclusive. So I think if I was to say that, right, and I would say that to women, and I would say that to other folks, right, holding different identities, right, who are engaging in relationships with men, is to say, hey, like gentleness is still a tool set that we can use with men, and to remember that full humanity of
That was amazing. I'm not even. I have
men.
nothing to follow. I have nothing to follow, and that's so good. Um, so if people want to book you for sessions or find you and follow you and keep up with you, let everybody know how to go about doing that.
Absolutely. So my Instagram is my first and my last name. I have a very unique last name, so you'll easily find me. So it's Jean, 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 Semelfort, Semelfort, on Instagram or Facebook. My email that you can reach me at as far as my practice is Cactus Center NJ for New Jersey at gmail.com. So it's CACTUS Center CENTERNJ at gmail.com.
That's perfect. I'm going to put all the information down just in case you didn't have a pen and you were listening to this while driving. It will be all in the details of everything that you need to find him. Thank you so much for coming on. It was so many good nuggets. You're going to make it very hard for me to create promo trailers here.
Thank
So
you very much for having me.
you're welcome. This was such a really good conversation. We'll have to come back and do a part two, especially when we are tackling women. But because this is Men's Health Month, we're focusing on men here. And you guys, thank you so much for listening. I hope you took away some really great nuggets and some good gems that you found easy to apply, and that the ones that are not easy to apply, you love yourself and you love your spouse enough, or the person that you're interested in enough, or your future person, to commit to learning how to apply those things in a day to day. Remember that it's important to love yourself first. Life matters, not just for you, but for all of those around you. And life matters globally. Until then, take care, guys. Bye.
Take care.